Hello, I'm Matt Appel, and today on the Working Tools podcast, we're going to be discussing the Gavel.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our opinions and thoughts are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions, either here on YouTube or on our Facebook page. We'd also appreciate a thumbs up and especially any comments on our videos.
And today I have with me very worshipful brother David Colbeth of the Grand Lodge of Washington. Hi, David.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for being the hostess with the mostest tonight, the moderator.
I'll do my best. Unfortunately, Connor and Stephen weren't able to meet us here this evening, but we'll get them back on here shortly.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to the new format, too, and hopefully this all works out well.
Yep. Yeah. I foresee great things.
Yes, for sure.
So, we said we were just going to discuss the Gavel today. What did you think about when you first thought of the Gavel as a topic?
Well, the Gavel, of course, we in Masonry, you think of this this thing that people hold, that masters hold, or the MC holds to kind of rule the lodge or to rule the event or what's happening. That's as far as Masonry goes. And then, of course, there's gavels all over the place in different legislative bodies and the courts and auctioneers and all kind of stuff that use gavels to control things. So I guess I think of it kind of as a control initially, as a control thing. But it was interesting doing some more research on it, that there's a lot more behind that. So
yeah, so I guess and again, doing a little bit of research about it, the things I came up with were the more or less three types. There's the gavel, like you were talking about, that the master and the other officers wield during the ritual and run the meeting. There's the common gavel that we talk about in our ritual as one of the symbols of Masonry. And then there's the setting maul, which is a sort of loosely interpreted, I suppose, as gavel, but it's excuse me, a hammer-like device. So I threw it in there too. But yeah, it's so in the installation in Washington, and for the worshipful master, we hand him the gavel and say, this is the symbol of your authority in the lodge, and tell him to wield it well. And it is sort of a symbol of order and decorum in the lodge, and how we, in reality, nobody has to respect it, but we all do. It's to keep meetings flowing well and for the master to run the lodge effectively.
Yeah. It was interesting too. I was reading about the Gavel of Authority. Carl Claudy did some comments about that in the Short Talk Bulletin in November 1930. July in 1931, and he was saying, when that somebody in theory could go and wrestle this device out of the master's hand if he wanted to, I suppose, but it's not really the gavel itself that gives him authority. It's as you mentioned, the installation. Once the master's installed, he can't be uninstalled, and so he can't be ungiven the authority of the gavel. And so the gavel is actually a symbol, which is what we as Masons talk. Everything's a symbol to us, and so a gavel is a perfect example of that. It's just a symbol of his authority. And as you mentioned, whether it's a gavel or a setting maul or the mallet, I do like that idea. The mallet is the way it was explained or described in the research I did. The mallet, of course, is a double-ended, more like a regular flat hammer on both sides, and then the setting maul is kind of a round. We probably should figure out how to do graphics here, but the setting maul is kind of a round base. With a handle, usually sits upright, and then the common gavel, as you mentioned, has the point on it, or the chiseled end to it on one side, and we talk about that to be able to break off the corners of rough stones or remove devices from our minds and consciences. And so, again, there's symbols of these tools that the Masons used and for different purposes. But they mentioned there that the master shouldn't ever be without it. He should always have it within reach, so that a single blow can bring him back to order. So it's a fascinating symbol.
It is, and yeah, for those, I suppose, who haven't been to a meeting, the gavel we're referring to, it's a lot like an auctioneer's gavel, or a gavel you see the Speaker of the House of Representatives wielding. It's a small hammer with rounded edges that you bang on the table or on the podium rather to get the attention of the group. And it's small, like I said. It's not a hammer that you're going to whack somebody with and stop them from taking it away from you. It's a tiny little piece of wood. Although I've seen some crazy big ones, but that's not what's usually used.
Talking about big ones, one of the things I was reading in that same Short Talk Bulletin, Claudia was talking about that being a symbol of authority, and it's not something new. It's as old as mythology. Thor, of course, the Scandinavian son of Odin and Freya, had this miraculous, all-powerful hammer that he used, and he threw it to do his will. It talks about Thor, like Jove, also controlled thunderbolts. And from the early myth, we associate lightning and thunder kind of together in the same manner. So the power of lightning, the power of the gavel or the hammer. It also said that in India, that their god, and I'm probably going to mess this, Parasurama, threw a battle axe over the lands, and that's how he took possession of the lands. He would throw a battle axe as far as he could, and as far as the battle axe could cover, that's the land that they possessed. Kind of cool. And then in the South Seas, and the islanders use a celt or hammer. Often they sit in huge size before the chief's dwelling as a symbol of his authority. So if you can imagine some dude standing out front with this big, huge. Yeah, in my mind, the D. Malay have this massive hammer here in Washington. This gavel. It's about 4 feet long, and they use that to open and close their conclaves. And so in my mind, it's this big, huge.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely. You've seen some crazy ones in Rainbow too. They have giant.
Do they?
Shakers.
I'm pretty new to that, so I haven't seen. All of them.
There aren't too many of them around because I guess the girls don't like to wield them. But
yeah, there's actually, I think there's a District 13 huge hammer, huge gavel now. Sean Sabula's family made one. I think it was his dad or uncle or somebody made one, and it's so big. It's got to be at least 4 feet long. Might be 5 feet long. It's massive. It's so big that you can't take it from place to place. It doesn't fit. I know Zane, when he tried to take it in the back of his car, he's got a little sports coupe, and it wouldn't fit in the back of his sports coupe. He couldn't take it to anyway.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So, in continuing on, I suppose the next gavel that we talk about frequently in Masonry is the common gavel. That, like you said, we use your operative masons use to break the corners off of rough stones, they say in the ritual. The better to fit them to the builder's use, but we use them to remove vices from our lives and our hearts and to improve ourselves. And I always find it amusing that whenever I hear this lecture delivered in lodge, there's inevitably some guy standing there holding the symbolic working tools that we have in the lodge, and usually the hammer is about 10 centimeters long and made of wood, and I'm thinking, how are we going to break the corners off a rock with that thing? But it always amuses me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's symbolically is we use to move ourselves from the rough ashlar that we are coming out of the quarries, that's just walking down the streets, into being an improved version of ourselves, a more perfect ashlar. I don't know the way to reach perfection, but it's trying to move in that direction.
I think the only time I've ever heard the idea of the perfect ashlar ever being really used is unfortunately in passing. Once a man has passed on, then they consider him a perfect ashlar. But yeah, I don't know if we'd ever would make that in a living form necessarily, for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I heard years ago, I forget who told me, that one of the things about the ashlars and the gavel and the trowel, actually, to skip ahead all sorts of topics, is if you think about the rough ashlar, it's big lumpy cube of rock, and you're trying to fit a bunch of these together to form a lodge, right? You're building a building, and you've got these big lumpy rocks. You need a lot of mortar to fill in the spaces in between these rocks to get them to fit together into a building. Whereas if the rocks are smoother, the smoother they are, the more even they are, that you use that gavel to make them even, then you need a lot less mortar and a lot less effort to form a cohesive lodge that, again, like you said, never going to be perfect, but the closer we work to, the closer we get to that, the better we fit in with our fellow brothers and our fellow men in society.
Very true. I wonder if the idea of again, jumping ahead, like you said, that we use the cement of brotherly love and affection to bring those together. So does that mean we don't have to use much brotherly love?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, you spend a lot of brotherly love sometimes on folks that are the outliers, shall we say?
Especially as deputy. I bet you have a lot of brotherly love you take with you.
I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and as you mentioned, the gavel, you were talking about the shapes and stuff and describing it for folks. One of the definitions in Mackey talks about that the gavel, the common gavel, it's actually, he thinks it comes from the German word Gipfel, meaning a summit or top or peak of idea of a pointed extremity. And so he also talks about being a gavel, like the gable end of a roof. So if you think about a house and they've got those windows that stick out, and kind of in that shape, and that's where the point of the gavel comes from. And so it was interesting. I didn't know about that. I didn't realize it was came from the gable or gavel end of a house.
That's interesting.
And that's what they used to. So when we think about the other thing I read was that that's the only time the common gavel is really used, or the term common gavel is used, as in the apprentice degree. And then it doesn't really talk about the common gavel so much, or a lot of times the master's gavel ends up being more of like the mallet version without the pointed chisel. And one theory was that he doesn't need that anymore. He doesn't need, in theory, he's gone through the degrees, he become a master mason, he's been educated and learned, and now as master of the lodge, he doesn't need to break off the superfluities and vices of his life. He's actually now in a position to instruct and to teach people how to do that, and doesn't need the chisel point in anymore. I thought that was interesting.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Connor arriving?
I don't know. I apologize. My computer's dinging here. The other cool thing was, as I mentioned, that the emblem is the gavel's an emblem of power, and it can, of course, be used for good or for evil or for ill in the hands of the person that uses it. And if the master wields that gavel with ill will or roughly, it could mean ruin to the lodge. If he doesn't wield it strong enough, if he wields it weakly, then it could mean failure for the lodge. But if he wields it wisely and in the spirit of brotherly love, I love this quote. It's again from Short Talk Bulletins from Joseph Fort Newton in October 1925. If wielded wisely and in the spirit of brotherly love, it's a wand of magic and a scepter of goodwill. I totally want to memorize this paragraph and somehow slide it into to the installation.
Yeah.
There's only like 2 guys in the room that would have any idea that I did it. But man is tempted and tested by the power as by nothing else. Few are the men able to use it and not abuse it. No man is a master mason or fit to be master of the lodge until he has learned to use the gavel with dignity, self-control, and gentle skill. I thought, man, if he could slide that into an installation without no one even know it.
Yeah, it's definitely the same flavor of language there. Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
So I guess the question that I always try and ask myself when I hear these conversations is, how would I apply this to my life? So how would, we talk about the gavel as a symbol of authority, or the common gavel as a tool to break off the vices and superfluities. Do you ever in your life find yourself thinking, "Oh, I'm gaveling now"? Is it something you make a conscious effort to use in your life, or?
I don't know that I use the image of the gavel necessarily, although it's interesting to think about that. I was reading again in the Short Talk Bulletin, which is a great resource, that he was talking about coming back from the summertime, coming back to lodge. There was appropriate timing now. We're in September here, and lodges are just going to be started up again. And so the idea of breaking off apathy and not wanting to get up and go out the door and get your suit on and go back to lodge. They were talking about those kind of things. And so, yeah, I guess I don't know if I use the gavel itself necessarily. I don't think about, I'm going to grab that gavel and break it off, although it's a great symbol. And now that we talked about it, maybe I will start using that. But I think Masonry in general has taught me to try to stop some of those bad habits, for sure. Mm-hmm. And definitely when you're gonna, we made a commitment to somebody. If I said, like tonight, if we said, we'll be there, and we can't be there for some reason, or I don't want to be on, I don't want to take my Sunday night and be there. Now, nothing against Connor and Steven, they're not able to be here, family emergencies and other things. That's not why they're here. But if we just said, we'll blow it off and not be here, or didn't prepare necessarily for the show, then I think those kind of things, that's the idea of the mental gavel, is to try and break off those things. Like today, I took time and studied. I wouldn't necessarily have studied before, researched, and I did earlier in the week as well. But I wouldn't necessarily have done that. This kind of stuff, the show has helped me to do more research. Just like doing memorization work has helped me do research. When I'm memorizing something, if I don't know a word exactly, or I think I know what it is, but it's differently used, I'll look up the meaning of the word and understand it. So it helps me understand what that word is being used for, and helps me to memorize the work. And same thing with this show, is it causes me to go and do research. And before I thought, what am I doing this research for? Just to learn this stuff, or what? But now to have a good conversation with somebody, and also then you can apply it to your life too. So as you get more topics, there's more things that can be applied to ourselves.
Yeah, so I know, I totally agree with you about even if it's something you knew, like even if you had read all of Mackey and you had all of it tucked in the back of your brain about the gavel or the cable toe or whatever, the fact that you have to think about it and consider it and prepare your mind to discuss it applies a little mental discipline there to your thought process.
Yeah. And
so lately, luckily it's below the where my camera ends here, but there's some of me that I wouldn't mind gaveling off down here, and there are some other vices that I've considered in my life of late, and I've been trying to do a little self-improvement, and I can't say that every time I've thought, no, don't go to Starbucks and get the high-calorie Frappo whatever, that I don't know that I've thought to myself, using that gavel. But, it's kind of getting those, injecting that temperance and that fortitude into your life. It's definitely part of that. It's part of the whole package there of the using the gavel to knock these aspects out of your life. Because I know I'm perfect now, so I've finished using it. I'm going to lay it down now. But it's an important. Again, like you said, I don't really have consciously thought about that as, I'm using the gavel, but it is an aspect of it for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of the study that I did, there were some comments about using a chisel with a mallet. And I hadn't thought about that. I wonder why, maybe there's no topic, why the chisel isn't one of our working tools. So you'd think that would be, I know they say that there wasn't sound of metal but that was afterwards, right? So at the quarry, in theory, right, there could be metal. So why wouldn't there be chisels involved? I don't know.
I want to say, and I'm probably going to be wrong when I say this, that there are jurisdictions, I want to say like in Australia maybe, that there are jurisdictions where the chisel is one of the working tools. And
Okay.
maybe it's not Australia. I know I've heard about somewhere because there's one that uses the pencil and the scarret and other things. So
Okay.
there may just be other sets of working tools that we don't have that.
Well, that's great. We if anybody knows about the chisel or any of the extra working tools, we'd love to have comments on the Facebook page and on the YouTube chat.
Absolutely.
Comment away, and we could do some more research. We could always do a follow-up video or whatever on that too. So
Definitely.
yeah. I was in Mackey. He says that the gavel of the master is also called a Hiram. I had never heard that before. He said because like that architect, it governs the craft and keeps order in the lodge, as he did in the temple. That totally made sense. I had never heard of it called a Hiram before, though. It was interesting.
Neither have I. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. And it makes sense if it's again symbol. It's a symbol of the person that is ruling over the instruction and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So speaking of which, I guess we should at least briefly address we discussed that the setting maul could be considered another type of gavel. So in those times, in the building of King Solomon's temple, it was a big, like you said, it was a big sort of bulbous thing with a handle on the top. And they used it essentially when they put the stone into the mortar, they used it to bang the stone around if it wasn't quite lined up right, to move it, to squish it down, to puff the air bubbles out, and also if they needed to scooch it a little bit one way or the other, they would whack it with these large wooden mallets to nudge the stones around a bit. And it's one of the symbols of masonry that we discuss in the degrees, but we might need to leave it there as far as why it is and what it is and what it symbolizes. I don't know that that's a conversation that we're willing to have on the air.
Yeah, I other than in that particular degree, I don't know that the setting maul gets talked about. I don't remember it from any of our ritual necessarily, or any other degrees, or any other spots. But it's interesting how some masters choose to have a setting maul versus a mallet versus the actual common gavel. Again, with the chiseled end on it, it's kind of fascinating. And again, I hadn't really thought about it that they had so many different theories behind what each of them meant or what they're symbolized. It's kind of fun.
And actually, there was a guy who was master in our district, I think at the same time I was, who did that. He was from Scotland, and he apparently his relatives from Scotland got it for him. That was what he used for a gavel. It wasn't quite the bulbous shape that I think of when I think of it. It was more cylindrical, but it was still clearly not the one where you're used to, like a little hammer.
Yeah. One of the other things
we got to figure out how to get pictures up here so we can. Head shapes.
Well, we could probably post something in the Facebook chat or whatever. We could post on some images of different gavels and things so people can have an idea.
Sure.
Yeah. One of the things that was interesting to me too, and again in the Short Talk Bulletin, Carl Claudia again in 1924 was talking about the giving courtesies or giving honor essentially to the gavel and to the master. The master is all powerful in our jurisdiction. I think at any lodge, the master is all powerful. He can refuse any motion or put any motion. He can rule any brother out of order or any subject, and he can say what he wants. He can or what he won't. He can permit what he wants to be discussed or not discussed. And if someone thinks he's not been fair or arbitrary or just, he can, of course, they have redress and they can go to the Grand Lodge and they can be appealed. But in the lodge, the gavel is the emblem of authority and it is supreme. And when the brothers drop down, he should at once obey without further discussion, period. And he said, it's very bad manners to do otherwise, and indeed it's close to lying between not only being bad manners, but also a Masonic offense, which I thought I don't think I've ever really heard that before, that not listening to the gavel is almost a Masonic offense if the master raps and you don't come to attention, essentially.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And that's the difference between going to refreshment and going off session. In our jurisdictions, there's a unique status called off session. And then also it's not at ease, it's I'm drawing a blank, Matt. or is it ease?
There's not an ease. There's
yes,
freedom from restraint.
Free from restraint. There you go. Yeah, and I remember in the code it talks about being free from restraint. You must be able to come to attention with a single rap of the gavel. And so again, there's the authority of that gavel is you're not really supposed to get up and move around. That's what so with a single rap, your attention should go right back to the master.
Yep. Yeah, and it's like we said, it's a powerful tool, but a tool with no actual power. It's all symbolic. It's the master rapping his gavel. If somebody were to stand up and walk away, there's nothing physically stopping them from doing that. It's all the society in which we live and the band of with brotherhood that we're trying to evince that is keeping those people from obeying this little piece of wood that somebody is waving around.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know, which actually makes me think, in our jurisdiction too, it is common to see when like the junior deacon or senior deacon report to the master, to see the master to wave his gavel to tell him to move on and go back go to where he's back to his station or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I hadn't really considered that until just now as another power that the gavel has that is not
yeah, some of the stuff I was reading, I didn't take notes on it, but I remember it talking about that while the master, we focus a lot of attention on the master and his gavel and the use of it, but as you said, he can essentially he can give authority to somebody else, and he does that through the ritual. He gives the authority to the senior warden or the junior warden as needed, or I remember talking about how, of course, we know that he can invite anybody he wants to the east and give them, honor them with the gavel. But I read, and I hadn't thought about it, that he shouldn't actually leave the east. He should always be within reach of that gavel so that he can then take authority and use its power, so to speak, to bring attention back as needed. And so while he might give that temporary authority to somebody else, he shouldn't ever go without arm's reach of it.
No, that makes perfect sense, yeah. Well,
cool. This is a great topic. This is a great topic.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this thoroughly. We have to read some more about it.
Absolutely, for sure.
So, yeah, thanks a lot, David. And do you have any other closing thoughts about?
Not necessarily on this. As we talked about, I alluded to in the beginning, this is kind of a new format. So I think we're going to end this one here. We're going to try and keep them under 30 minutes or right at about 30 minutes, unless it's a great topic. If it is, then and we can't just not stop talking about it, then we'll probably break it into a couple parts, and so it'll be a part 1, part 2. But I think we've hammered this one, so to speak.
Oh, I think we definitely need to end this podcast. So thank you all for coming out, and I apologize for that last joke. And we look forward to seeing you next time on The Working Tools.